all night long.
All right.
Because it really gets me in the mood. Yep.
Let's go ahead and begin. We are, of course, still in the book of Zechariah.
Oh, we're going to be there.
Plodding along. And tonight, we intend to cover a monumental 6 verses. Hopefully we can get through these. I'm interested in how you're finding this book. I'm finding it challenging. I'm finding it difficult to teach. I'm finding it challenging to study for.
Who chose this book?
I think I did. Actually. It has many images. It has a huge number of references into the Old Testament. There are many elements of the Old Testament that you have to go back to and understand to really interpret this at all. Of course, its time flips back and forth. You're going from Zechariah's day to Christ's day to Christ's return to the millennial age, back to Zechariah. Zechariah, of course, as we're here in chapter 11, he is now also playing out or enacting what it is that God tells him to enact, to demonstrate to the people what's going to happen. So we have a play or a drama going on at the same time that the prophetic word is being given. So it's a challenging book. Now, one thing...
I think Zechariah felt.
Yeah, exactly. You know, it's just
and
like...
You know, if this is difficult for you, can you imagine what it is for the rest of us? I mean, you know.
Well, it's
very difficult.
The thing about that we're going to look at tonight, and I hope you'll... You know, this is one of the things I guess I took away from this week as we go into this particular study of the last part of the 11th chapter, is that you literally have to, when you go to these passages, you have to carefully look at what the words say. You know, and it brings you back to this fundamental issue in terms of trying to interpret the word, and that is, you know, who, what, when, where, why, and so what. You have to go back and look at these things, and I'm going to show you a couple examples tonight in what I put together as this outline, where it becomes very critical for you to realize that there are some things in the particulars that if you don't realize them, you won't really catch the point. And it's we'll progress here, and I think you realize that. But so let's read verses 12 and 13 of chapter 11. He says, I said to them, now remember, well, we'll go into this, but let me read it first. He says, I said to them, if it's good in your sight, give me my wages, but if not, never mind. So they weighed out 30 shekels of silver as my wages. Then the Lord said to me, throw it to the potter, that magnificent price at which I was valued by them. So I took the 30 shekels of silver and threw them to the potter in the house of the Lord. Now, Zechariah, of course, is acting out shepherding the flock. He was told, or he stated in verse 7, that the flock is doomed. He's shepherding now a doomed flock. He's shepherding now a cursed flock. Why is it that they're a doomed flock? Why is it they're now a cursed flock? What have they failed to do?
Follow His commands. Over and over and over.
Okay? Now remember, you got to keep in mind in these verses, there's 3 different types of shepherds that he's talking about. He's talking about the false shepherds, which are the false leaders, the false teachers, which includes, in Jesus' day, the Pharisees, Sadducees, high priests, etc. We talked about the three false shepherds of probably of Christ's day. Then, of course, he's talking about the true shepherd, and at times Zechariah is acting as the true shepherd. Okay, he's acting out as the true shepherd. Tonight we're going to see a third shepherd that's being talked about. He's called the foolish shepherd or the idle shepherd, or probably best interpretation of the Hebrew is the vain or arrogant shepherd. We're going to talk about him. So you got to remember there's three different types of shepherds here. You got to kind of pay attention to which shepherd is being talked about and which shepherd is speaking at the time. So,
the good shepherd?
Well, the good shepherd would be the true shepherd. Okay, the Messiah.
He's speaking.
Yes. So here we see that God, the Lord, says, okay, if it's good in your sight. Now, who's he speaking to? Whose sight?
Crowds.
Okay, who represent the
Jews,
the flock, right?
Yeah.
So now he's speaking to the flock, and he's saying, if it's good in your sight, give me my wages. He's a shepherd, and the shepherd was paid to shepherd his sheep. Okay, so he's saying, if it's good in your sight, give me my wages. But if not, never mind. In other words, I'm not convinced that you'll probably do it anyway. Really, in essence, what he's saying. And then the flock, as it were, weighs out 30 shekels of silver as the wages, the good shepherd's wages. Now, this 30 shekels of silver is a particular amount that we need to pay attention to. Okay, let's go back to Ezekiel 31:32. We actually have looked at this in the past. Exodus 31, and we're going to look at verse 32. So go to Exodus 31. Again, this is where you have to trace down the meaning of these things. They're interpreted somewhere.
You mean Genesis?
Yeah,
You're right.
And
They stole Joseph.
there is no verse 32.
Okay, but let me just a second. Oh, I wrote it down incorrectly.
The value of slave.
Yes, the value of the slave. Where is it?
Exodus 21, 32.
All right, let's look. So I typed 31, didn't I? Sorry.
Is it 21?
Is that the value of the slave back
Yes.
there?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Sorry about that. Got to correct that.
Okay,
we got you covered.
All right.
That's only one.
That's right.
One mistake.
My problem is my typing. That is always my problem. All right, so here he's talking about, laws of personal injury here.
Right.
Moses is being instructed by the Lord. And if this happens, then you need to compensate in this way. Okay, so we get to 31, and whenever an ox gores a son or a daughter, it shall be done to him according to the same rule. Verse 32, if the ox gores a male or female slave, the owner shall give his or her master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. So if it kills a slave, then the value of that slave is 30 shekels of silver. Okay, that's what we're being told here. So we have a meaning to 30 shekels of silver. Now, it's interesting to also note two things. Since you're in Exodus, go back to Genesis 37. This is maybe somewhat of an aside, but I'm going to show you this. So go back to Genesis 37. Here's a story about Joseph. Okay? And we're going to look in verse 28 of 37 of Genesis. It says, Then some Midianite traders passed by. Now, of course, Joseph has been thrown in this dry well by his brothers because they're jealous of him. They can't stand him. And it says, then some Midianite traders passed by. So they pulled him out and lifted Joseph out of the pit. And they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And you go, well, okay, well, why is it that they sold him for 20 when the value of the slave was 31? Of course, we're talking about different time frames here also.
Different currency.
No, not necessarily different currency so much.
Fire sale.
So, yes. Now turn over to Leviticus 27. Go back to the right past Exodus to Leviticus 27. And we're going to see something here. Leviticus 27, and we're going to look at verses 3 through 8. This is talking about laws concerning vows and tithes and valuations. Okay? If your valuation, verse 3, is of the male from 20 years of age to 60 years of age, then your valuation shall be 50 shekels of silver after the shekel of the sanctuary. Or if it's a female, then your valuation will be 30 shekels. And if it be from 5 years even to 20 years, then your valuation of the male shall be 20 shekels, which is part of the reason why Joseph was valued that. And for the female, 10 shekels. But if then they are from a month even up to 5 years old, then your valuation should be 5 shekels of silver for the male. For the female, your valuation shall be 3 shekels. And it goes on and talks about then if it's 60 years or upward. So what we see here is there's a changed valuation that occurs later on in the law.
Depending on age.
Depending on age, and I guess you could say there's an inflation factor that's going on here from the time of Joseph later in the law, to this time where it's talked about 30 shekels. So it ends up being 30 shekels of silver. Now,
so Christ's evaluation was as of a slave.
yes, absolutely.
And the right age.
Yes, and of course he is just above 30 years
We're
of
only
age.
worth 15.
Yeah, apparently. So we see here in these verses that the Lord tells Zechariah to act out this next part, okay? Taking this, quote, wonderful, generous value, which of course is absolutely tongue-in-cheek, okay? In other words, they're asking what's the value of the good shepherd shepherding the flock. And they say he's worth the value of a slave. That's what Israel's evaluation is here, of the good shepherd's value in terms of doing this. His wages, okay? So this generous amount of Messiah's wages. And of course, what is it that God says to do? Well, he says a very interesting thing to do here in verse 13, back in Zechariah 11. The Lord said to me, in him acting as Messiah, okay, throw it to the potter, that the magnificent quote-unquote price at which it was valued by them. So I took it, the 30 shekels of silver, and I threw it to them, to the potter, in the house of the Lord. Now, of course, you have to ask yourself, why in the world is he throwing money in the temple, and what the heck does that have to possibly do with a potter? Right? He throws it into the temple. Well then, okay, I guess I can understand that in a sense, but what does this potter have to do with it? Well, potter's fields were notoriously worthless pieces of real estate, because all you could do with them is dig the miry clay out of them and use the clay to try to make pottery. They just had almost no value whatsoever. They were not good real estate. So I want you to turn.
Don't they call graveyards Potter's Field, though?
Well, they do because of this, interestingly enough. Mm-hmm. It comes from this. So turn now in the New Testament, first of all, to Matthew 26. Matthew 26. And we're going to read first verses 14 and 15. And then we're going to go into chapter 27. Matthew 26, 14 to 15. Then one of the 12, named Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests, and he said, "What are you willing to give me to deliver him to you?" And they weighed out to him 30 pieces of silver. Isn't it interesting? Zechariah states that the valuation of Messiah would be 30 pieces of silver. 510 or 15 years later, the Pharisees and the Sadducees here are evaluating what they'll pay for the betrayal of Jesus, and what do they pick? 30 pieces of silver. All right? If that's a coincidence, it's one remarkable coincidence.
Well, they probably read Zechariah.
That's right. I'm certain that they were intending on that at that time. Now
Then they would be admitting that he's the Messiah.
Absolutely.
So there's a problem there.
So go now to chapter 20, next chapter, 27, and we're going to start reading in verse 3. So it says, "Then when Judas, who had betrayed Jesus, saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse." That actually means in the Greek, not repentance, but rather he felt bad about the situation he was in. Okay, he realized that he'd been duped, used, and done something really bad. Okay, he had been condemned, that he felt remorse, and he returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and to the elders. Verse 4, saying, "I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." But they said, "What is that to us? See to that yourself." And there's one thing I find that's really remarkable about this, and you don't understand it entirely until you go to John 13. You don't have to turn there, but I'm going to read it for you.
Do you think Judas, when he felt, quote, remorse, or he regret that he involved himself in that situation?
No.
Did he feel that? Did he know what's going to happen to his soul?
I don't know if he knew what was going to happen when he betrayed Christ, but we're going to see here in the verse I'm going to read you, we're going to know what happened. Okay? There's an element you need to understand, and that's John 13:27. I'll read it to you. And after the morsel, this is at the Last Supper. Okay, remember, they ask, "Well, who's going to betray it?" Because Jesus says, "One of you is going to betray me." And they say, "Who?" And he takes a piece of bread, okay, matzah, dips it in, okay, and hands it to Judas. All right? So it says, after the morsel, Satan then entered into him. And Jesus then said to Judas, and to Satan, really, "Do what you do quickly." Isn't it remarkable that the time in which he betrays Jesus, he has been possessed by Satan? Isn't it interesting that both Judas and Satan declare what about Jesus being betrayed?
Innocent.
Even Satan is admitting that Jesus is innocent. Isn't it interesting?
But he said that before. No.
He has been possessed by the devil.
Yeah, but is he still possessed by the devil when he feels remorse?
I think he absolutely is, because the Greek does not indicate that he repented. The Greek indicates that he felt guilty and bad about what he did. He got caught in a bad situation, and he feels badly about being caught in it, apparently. So the point is, he doesn't repent. There's no evidence in any way that he repents.
Well, if he was
And of course he goes and kills himself, which is very predictable, because what happens in demonic possession to many people that are possessed,
And swine.
and swine, they commit suicide or they're killed in some way. The demon wants them to die. What happens? Why? Why does he want them to die? Because what happens?
So he can go someplace else.
Well, and because then he commits their spirit and soul to eternal hell,
Yeah,
eventually.
He's
It's
done.
done.
He's got one.
He got one. Takes him with him, yes.
You just read, therefore Jesus said to him, what you do, do quickly. Can we assume that Satan and therefore Judas couldn't do what they were supposed to do until Jesus let them do so?
Absolutely. I agree. That's a good point. It was all according to the plan of God. It was all according to the timing of God. They couldn't do it until He told them to do it. They couldn't do it until it was the right time to do it. It was the right order to do it. And absolutely it was all planned out.
Right.
Now I think there's another thing we need to keep in mind. That you don't have to turn here, but I'm going to read it to you again because it's such a key verse to understand. And it's Genesis 3:15. I'm certain that Satan has this all in mind while he's doing all this. This is God's curse and promise. Okay? God says, I will put enmity or hatred between you, Satan, and the woman, and between your seed or offspring and her seed or offspring. Some guy named he, the offspring of her, shall bruise you on the head. Okay? Mortal. A mortal wound. Okay? A guy named he, who is the offspring of the woman, a woman, okay, will mortally wound the devil. Okay? And he, okay, it is the devil, shall and you shall bruise him on the heel, he says to Satan. Now, Satan knows that sometime there's going to be an event that's going to occur. A very critical event. And I think part of his motivation is he's trying to turn it around the other way. He's decided that he's going to kill Messiah because he's been prophesied back in the garden that Messiah would do him in. So he's going to get the first shot in here. That's part of his motivation here. Ironically, okay, what he doesn't understand. What is it that he doesn't understand in this?
Resurrection.
Right. He doesn't understand that in the process of stirring up the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the people to make certain that Jesus is condemned to death, it is his doom that he kills him. Because he kills him, Jesus then takes all the sins of all humanity upon him in the process of that death. Then the Father resurrects him. The whole price has been paid. All of the souls that were in Sheol are transferred to heaven. Every future person, of course, that dies will immediately go to heaven. And he's been completely done in. He couldn't see the strategy of God in the middle of his enmity, his hatred of the Messiah.
He wasn't aware that he's been a part of God.
No. He got taken in. He got outflanked.
So Satan knows only as much as God lets him.
Absolutely.
Okay.
He does not have total understanding. Isn't it interesting? So we see here that, and I didn't go through the Old Testament verse, but the Levites are told in the law that they could not accept into the temple treasury sinful money. Blood money. It was a prohibition, okay? So the Pharisees, knowing this, decide that they're going to, as I put here, kill two birds with one stone. They're going to take this 30 pieces of silver, this terribly generous amount, okay? And they're going to decide, well, we can't put it into the treasury, but we can offset an obligation we have by the law, and that is we have an obligation to bury indigent people. So they decide, we'll take this 30, we won't put it in the treasury, we'll take it directly, we'll find this guy that has this little plot of ground that's virtually worthless, that he digs clay out of. That's why it has the name the Potter's Field. And they take and pay him the 30 pieces, and then they get title to this ground, and that's where, of course, they bury indigent people. So this is what goes on here. Again, the amazing thing is how precise it all is and how it's predicted in this precision over 500 years before it ever happens. It's absolutely incredible prophecy.
Clay's hard to dig in, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like verse 15.
Go ahead.
Zechariah. And Jehovah said unto me, take unto thee yet again the instruments of the foolish shepherd.
Yes. And, he's called the foolish shepherd. And actually, there's two different words. He's called the foolish shepherd, or it's interpreted the foolish shepherd, in one section, and he's called a different thing. Let's turn back now to Zechariah. It's interesting you point that out. And that is, in 15 it says, take again for yourself the equipment, as you just read, of the foolish shepherd. In verse 17 it says, woe to the worthless shepherd. In essence, the first word in the Hebrew, the foolish shepherd, is kind of the stupid, blind, dumb, lack of understanding shepherd. But the word here that's in verse 17 in Hebrew, the worthless shepherd, we'll get to it, is a word that means the arrogant shepherd. Okay, the vain shepherd. They're actually very similar words, and they're actually the same root, but they have a different ending to them, and yet they have different meanings. So, at any rate, so let's go through verses 14 through 17. I'll try to finish off this chapter here. Let's read them first. It says, so then I cut up my second staff. Remember, he has these two staffs. One is called Union, and the other is called Grace. So the second one is the one called Union. He says, I cut my second staff, Union, into pieces to break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. Then the Lord said to me, take again for yourself the equipment of the foolish shepherd. For behold, and he says, for behold, I am going to raise up a shepherd in the land who will not care for the perishing, seek the scattered, heal the broken, or sustain the one standing, but will devour the flesh of the fat sheep and tear off their hooves. Woe to the arrogant, vain shepherd who leaves the flock. A sword will be on his arm, and on his right eye. His arm will be totally withered, and his right eye will be blind. Quite an enigmatic verse, verse 17. All right, so we're going to try to tear this one apart. So first of all, he says, for behold, I'm going to raise up. He says, take again the equipment of the foolish shepherd. Now, what's the equipment of a good shepherd?
We're not in verse 15.
15. What's the equipment of the traditional good shepherd?
He cares for the flock. He goes after them if they leave.
What's his equipment? What does he carry with him?
A staff.
Staff and a rod.
And a rod and a staff. Psalm 23. So the rod is to beat, it's like a club to beat off the predator, beat down the predator. And the staff has a hook on it. It's to pull the sheep, move the sheep, guide the sheep, grab the sheep, etc. That's the correct shepherd's equipment. But this guy he's talking about has different equipment. Okay? He has something that has to do with his sword that's on his arm. And of course he has some type of different equipment, instruments that he deals with that are very different instruments than the correct shepherds have. Now, what happens here is we have a 1900 plus year gap in time which occurs. We're jumping ahead to discuss about this third type of shepherd called the foolish or vain or arrogant shepherd. So he introduces to Israel this idle or vain shepherd. Now they've already tolerated, remember, the false shepherds. Okay? And they've already rejected the true shepherd. Okay? Now they're about to meet the worst of all. Okay? He will pose as a legitimate shepherd. He will pose as a leader. He will pose as someone who cares about them, will do something for them, will lead them or help them in some way. Okay? Like I said, in Hebrew, one of his names is Eliel, in verse 17 actually, which means vain or arrogant. He will pose as a shepherd of Israel, and therefore I believe we must probably assume he's going to be Jewish. He's going to have a Jewish background. I don't know how they would accept him as a shepherd, probably unless he was a Jew, or at least posed as that. Okay? But he will do everything the shepherd, a correct shepherd, will not do. And then we're told that in verse 15. Okay, I'm sorry, in verse 16. That all the things that should be done by a correct shepherd, he will not do them. Now, let's try to trace this down and understand what this means. As my first grade teacher said, put on your thinking caps. Because you're going to have to think through. Mrs. Poole. There you go. See, he remembered. Mrs. Poole. Remember her saying it? Put on your
The
thinking
foolish
caps.
shepherd in 15 and worthless or vain, arrogant shepherds, are they the same?
Same person.
The same person, okay.
They're described in somewhat two different ways. They're the same person. Okay. Now, let's turn first to Daniel chapter 7. There's a lot of information that we're going to find in the prophets, and there's a lot of information we're going to find. So we're going to literally jump between the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. Again, think about this. We're jumping from Daniel's time, which is approximately-ish 600 BC, to John's time writing it in approximately 80 or 90 AD, to the events that John is talking about, which are 2,000 years beyond that time of John. It's covering a very broad period of time, these events that are being talked about here. So Daniel 7, and we're going to read verses 4 through 8. Oops, the wrong page. Okay. So starting first, in verse 4. He's talking about these kingdoms that are going to come. Okay? He says the first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I kept looking until the wings were plucked, and it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. A human mind was also given to it. And of course, we know that the interpretation of this kingdom is Babylon. He's describing Babylon. That's the first kingdom he's talking about. Verse 5, and behold another beast, the second one, resembling a bear. And it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And thus they said to it, arise, devour much meat. And of course it progresses and it consumes territory and peoples. This is the Medo-Persian Empire. And then there's this next one. After this I kept looking, and behold another one, like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird, which implied it moved rapidly. And it sure did, because this is Greece. And we know that from the time Alexander was 19, okay, in 11 years' time, he conquered all the way from Greece to the Indus Valley of India, which is a massive amount of territory in 11 years. That's very rapid, particularly when you're doing it by infantry on foot and some cavalry on the horseback. It's remarkable. He says, and then he says about it also, it had 4 heads, which of course refer to what? His 4 generals that divide up the kingdom once he dies, and dominion was given to it. So we know those are the 3 historical cultures and empires, but then there's a 4th one. Verse 7, after this I kept looking in the night visions, and behold a 4th beast. Interestingly enough, this thing is so horrific, and its actions are so amazing, he doesn't even ascribe a type of beast to it. He just says it's a 4th beast. He can't name it like any other animal. He says it's dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong, and it had large iron teeth. it devoured and crushed and trampled down the remainder with its feet, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So we know that in the historical context, this is the Roman Empire. But it's not only the Roman Empire. We begin to realize in Daniel as we read further that Rome has two versions. It has the version that occurred from the time that we know about historically of approximately 58 BC all the way until what people call maybe about 458 AD. This is the time frame that historians put on the effectiveness of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, of course, is never conquered, actually. It breaks apart. It merges itself in a very real way with the Catholic Church. Okay? It's then called the Holy Roman Empire. And then, of course, as it breaks apart into its composite countries, we then end up eventually having what it becomes eventually medieval Europe. Again, predominantly Roman Catholic Europe, with few exceptions. And all those countries still are what's left of the Roman Empire. It doesn't totally go away. Okay? But apparently it gets revived at a point in time. And it has a new leader that does some very different things. And it has a new composition. In its new composition, it has 10 heads, 10 regional powers, 10 areas of influence, 10 kings, if you want, to put it that way. And then verse 8 says, while I was contemplating these horns, these 10 regional powers, okay? While I was contemplating, behold, another horn, a little one, came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were pulled out by its roots before it. Before who? Before the little horn.
Yeah.
So the little horn finds a way to depose 3 of the leaders of these 3 regional entities, gets rid of them. So there's only 7 left. All right? And then it says, and behold, this horn possessed eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth uttering great boasts. And who do we call this person? The Antichrist. Now remember, great boasts. What is the idle shepherd called in verse 17? He's called the vain or arrogant shepherd in the Hebrew. So we're talking about a description of the same person here. Okay, you following so far? All right, now it's going to get a little bit more sticky. So now, let's jump over to Revelation 13. And we're going to look at a similar passage that John tells us about. Revelation chapter 13. And we're going to start in verse 1. He says, he stood on the sand of the seashore. John's standing there looking. And I saw a beast coming out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. Why does it only have 7 heads? Because what did Antichrist eventually do? Got rid of 3. So John correctly sees this.
Doesn't he have a little head up there somewhere?
Well, you'll see that. And on his horns were 10 diadems, that is, 10 ruling entities, 10 ruling powers. And on his heads were blasphemous names. So whoever this head is that controls this is a blasphemer. In other words, he's absolutely against the God of Israel. Verse 2, and the beast which came, now, think of this carefully. Use your thinking cap on this. And the beast which I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth was like the mouth of a lion. Now, what do you observe about this?
As we read from your outlines, the opposite order.
You should say, why is it in the opposite order? Always look at these particular details and ask why. What could it mean? It isn't, you cannot assume, and I would not in any way assume, that John just made kind of a mistake here, and he was sloppy, and he's supposed to put them the other way, but he put them this way. Now he's being dictated this thing by the angel. Okay?
Well,
So, what he's telling us here is the order he's talking about here is it's Greece, and then it's Media-Persia, and then it's Babylon. So he's now emphasizing Babylon, the last one. Okay? As the mouth of a lion. And the dragon, which of course we know, as we see in Revelation 12:9, is the devil. The dragon gave a person called him, his power and his throne and great authority. Verse 3, I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and his fatal wound was healed. And the whole earth was amazed and followed after the beast. And they worshipped the dragon because he gave his authority to the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and was able to wage war with him. And there was given to him a mouth speaking, again, arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months, that is 3.5 years, were given to him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is in Israel, that is those who dwell also in heaven. Now, let's go through this. So Babylon is emphasized here as we read these three in the order of them. So who, again, is the founder of Babylon? Nimrod. So let's go back to Genesis 10:8. Hold your hand here in Revelation. But go back to Genesis 10:8. Let's remind ourselves about some key information about this guy named Nimrod, who's the founder of Babylon. Okay? Genesis 10:8. Now Cush became the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. In the Hebrew, he was changed into a Gibborim. That's what it says in the Hebrew. He was changed into a Gibborim. What is a Gibborim?
Hybrid.
A hybrid. It's a giant.
Fallen angel.
A fallen
woman.
yes, a hybridization between a fallen angel and a human woman, a Gibborim. So it says he was changed into a Gibborim.
Was he the first Gibborim?
No,
No,
he was not.
because the flood destroyed.
Yes,
Yeah, that's right.
he was not. All right. So keep this in mind now. Pardon?
Transgender.
No, not transgender. Transhumanism. Transhumanist.
How was
Yes.
it changed?
Now let's go on, okay? So he becomes a Gibborim. Now, go back. You can leave now here, Genesis 10. Let's go back with your finger in Revelation 13. And let's look at verse 3 again. And I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain, and he received a fatal head wound. Okay? So, it says here that this future leader, this he, will have a fatal wound. And what does it say about that wound?
Healed.
And it was healed. So, he supposedly is dead or supposed to die, and it's healed. Now, verse 4 says, as a result of this event, that he will be worshipped. And it also says that he will have a level of power that no one can oppose him. Now, I ask the question, is this his transformational event like that of Nimrod, where he becomes a hybrid? I believe what's going to happen is that at the point at which this fatal wound occurs is the event in which he's now transhumanistically changed into a Gibborim himself. Now you say, well, why do I say that? Let's go on. Okay? I believe that it says that he becomes unique and invincible. Who is like the beast? He's unique. who can make war with him. He's unique and invincible. Okay? So those are characteristics of him once this occurs to him. I believe this is what we could call the satanic resurrection. Remember, Satan is always a copier. Jesus was resurrected from the dead into this new life. In the same way, this man who is going to become Antichrist is resurrected into a new life. He becomes godlike. All right? He becomes godlike. Now, back to Daniel 7 for a moment. There's an interesting thing that's said. Let's go back to it. Daniel 7. And it's in verses 7 and 8. It's particular. It says at the end of 7, and it was different from all the beasts that were before it, because it had 10 horns. Okay? So here's this unique quality. It talks about this other horn. Okay? And interestingly enough, we find here, when it says it became unique, it says it's unique. In the Hebrew here, it doesn't say he is unique. In the Hebrew, it says he became unique. In other words, he wasn't so much unique, but at a point in time, he was changed into something that was unique. That's what the Hebrew literally says there. It again speaks of what we just saw in these other verses. It fits with these other verses here. Okay? Again, until you look at these things carefully, you don't pick out this information. So speaking of the emergence of the beast, it says he became unique. Also, look at also in Daniel 7:20, drop down to 20. It says another very interesting thing about him after he becomes this unique person. Look at the last phrase here in 20. And which it says of him, he was uttering great boasts, he's arrogant, and which, speaking of him, was larger in appearance than its associates. Literally it says, he's a giant. It says it right there. He's larger in his appearance. That is not a figurative phrase. He's big, okay? And of course, as I put down here, in the Latin, what were the Gibrim called? What's the translation? Gigantus, the giants. So we have a lot of information, I think, that would imply that there's going to be a transformational event which occurs here. There's something else that's going to, I think, that indicates this too. I'm trying to give you the evidence for this. Turn back to Daniel 2. There's this very enigmatic verse in Daniel 2, which many people have stumbled on, and it is indeed a difficult verse. And it's verse 43. It's talking about this last kingdom. Okay, remember he talks about this fourth kingdom? And he says this about this kingdom. He's talking about the revised version of it, the future version of it. He says, verse 43, and in that you saw the iron mixed with common clay, they, not him, not it, but they, personal plural pronoun, okay, will combine with one another in the seed of men. But they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. Now, isn't that an interesting... He says, literally, he's describing this last earthly kingdom, and he says the kingdom is like iron and clay. That is, two things that mix, but are unlike substances which cannot naturally mix. How do you naturally mix, even under great heat, iron with clay? They're just unlike.
It's talking about changing genetics.
Exactly. He says that this change, this weird combination, this strange way in which iron and clay are somehow merged together, is merged in the seed of men. It's merged genetically.
But it says, but they will not adhere to one another.
Yes. In other words, it isn't going to be permanent. It isn't going to stay around permanently.
Because it's not God's plan.
Exactly. Just like in the first episode, under Noah's flood, it wasn't permanent. God tolerated it for a little while and said, "You're done," and then judged it through the flood. Okay? In the same way, this will not last forever. It will not permanently be. I note here one of Ann's favorite verses, Matthew 24:37. For just like in the days of Noah, Jesus says, right? Speaking of his return. Now, does it make more sense why he's saying it's just like the days of Noah? There's some weird stuff that's going to occur. What we today in science call transhumanism. That's interesting. There's two major tenets of transhumanism. When they argue why they should be able to change the genetic code of humanity, they make two major arguments. They say, A, we will be able to cure all diseases. What happens to the Antichrist? He has a mortal head wound and he's healed. And then it says, secondly, we will achieve immortality. What did Satan say to Adam and Eve in the garden?
Like God.
You will be like God. You'll live eternally like God. It's the same lie. It's the exact same lie. Okay? And it's going to be the lie of this genetic entity that's occurring very, very much today. I had to give you this quote that I looked up by Aristotle. I think it's important. He says, science without virtue is mischief. Isn't that a great statement? There's a lot of truths.
Interpret that.
Science without moral backing to it leads to bad things, mischief, bad actions, bad behavior, bad outcomes. Well, today, we have no morality behind technology. It's gone. There's none. It's absolutely philosophically what we call Machiavellian. Machiavellian means the ends justify the means. So whatever you can do and whatever outcome you can achieve from it, do it.
It's
Don't-
okay if it.
Right.
Good.
As long as you can use this transhumanist technology and you can end up changing human DNA, okay,
Price doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter as long as you can sell it and bottle it and package it and make money on it, which is exactly what they'll do. Does it make, to me, this is why, having gone over all this, I have a particular interpretation of what the mark of the beast is. I think it's absolutely a transhumanist technology, and I think it's why we're told if you take the mark, you can't be saved. Because you're no longer a genetic human being anymore. You've become a hybrid. What happened to the hybrids? What did God do to the hybrids? He drowned them and killed them. Okay?
Give them a shot.
Right. I think it very likely could be some form of a vaccine. Okay? Look at all the vaccine stuff that's going on in the world now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane. They're literally arresting people or threatening to put them in jail if they won't take vaccines. What happened to free choice? What are they doing to children now? They have all these states making laws like California that say there's no exception. You must vaccinate children and you must present it. There's no moral objection. There's no technology objection. There's no religious objection. You've got to do it. Why? Why do they insist on this? So that they can make laws so that they can eventually come to the point where they're going to have this really great vaccine. It's going to really solve your problems, heal all your diseases, make you strong, make you vital, make you godlike. Maybe you even get a few inches of growth out of it. Okay? Yes.
Could you please just kind of summarize this E here? So we went through
Okay. What?
the opposite order. So John,
Is emphasizing Babylon. So since he's emphasizing the last one because he reversed the order, and I also just mentioned the notes in Revelation, what's one of the emphasis? Mystery Babylon. So there's something about Babylon the history of Babylon, the person of Nimrod, what was done in Babylon that has to do with the end times. Okay? And just like Nimrod was transformed into a Gibborim, I believe it gives us the evidence that this person that we call Antichrist will be transformed into a hybrid, transhumanistically, okay? And he will gain, therefore, these powers that are described. He will become big. He will be bigger in appearance than his fellows. No one can oppose him in strength and power.
Majestically healing
Yeah.
himself and the crowd. Now, is that the same person Zechariah talks about?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. He's talking about the idol shepherd. Now, what happens to the idol shepherd? He's damaged. It says in his forearm and in his eye, in his head. Okay, isn't that what's said? Okay. Now I'll show you what I think in a minute, what I think the sword on his arm means.
Now, did Satan cause Nimrod to become this?
Certainly did. How else could it have occurred? I mean, it's absolutely, it had to be.
Because Nimrod was alive.
He was a regular guy until a point in time.
Right.
Okay. And then he was satanically, miraculously changed. Okay.
So it's more of a possession than it is maybe a chemical vaccine type thing.
No. I think it is genetic, because it has to be because of what's said in Daniel 2:40, 43 and 44. It says that this changing of these two unlike elements, angelic and human, occur in the seed of men. It has to be genetic. That's what it's telling us there.
But in order to receive this, it's not something that a Christian is going to get by mistake or held down and forced on.
No, it can't be.
Yeah, it has to be a choice, because you have to give allegiance.
Yeah, of course it could cost your life that you refuse to accept it.
Well,
It could be your martyrdom.
That's the deal breaker.
Yes.
The incentive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You go, here's the deal. You either take this, they're
I
going
know,
to.
but some Christians would worry that, okay, I'm going to go down and get the shingles vaccine. Is that changing my DNA and doing this kind of thing? And
It ain't going to be the shingles vaccine. I'm certain there's going to be billboards and flyers and television articles. We have this new, super unbelievable vaccine. We're only selling it. It's only $29.99 on special. It will cure all of your ills. It'll make you 6 inches taller. You'll be stronger. You'll be more vital. You'll be able to run like the $6 Million Man. You won't know the $6 Million Man. All
or
those.
it could be more tricky, like it guarantees you will never get cancer.
You'll never get cancer. You'll live until you're at least 150 or 200 years old. It'll be this big marketing campaign.
It'll be a hook.
Yeah. It'll be a hook. Right. All right. That's my evidence. You evaluate it for yourself to see what you think. I'm trying to pull together all the verses.
GMO corn.
All right.
Very interesting.
Okay. So now let's go back to this foolish shepherd. Let's go back to Zechariah. Now you know what takes so long to study for this thing.
Yeah. Really.
All right. By the way, if you look up commentaries to try to find what I'm saying, you're not going to find any. So
Well, you're making this up as you go.
I think the commentaries are woefully lacking. Joe sent me a couple of them. I looked at a few of them. I thought, man, that just does not seem to explain what's being discussed here.
You get it from the Greek.
You get it from the Greek and Hebrew. When you look at these sentences, it tells you some very specific things that you have to pay attention
And
to.
you're using the Bible to interpret.
Absolutely.
Which is
Yeah.
the proper way. to do it.
My evidence for my argument here is all from the scriptures. Okay, I mean, take it or leave it. Investigate it for yourself. Be a good Berean, like it says in Acts 17, 11. But all right, so let's look at this last verse. It says, "Woe to the arrogant here, arrogant shepherd, a vain shepherd." Remember what's it say about Antichrist? He constantly, he's a big mouth. He blasphemes, he's arrogant, he speaks out, he's all about himself. Woe to this arrogant shepherd who leaves the flock. In other words, at first he looks like he's supposed to be helping, but then he turns on them. I'm sorry?
The first 3.5.
The first 3.5 versus the second 3.5 years of the 7-year tribulation period, yes. It says a sword will be on his arm. And here's what I think it means. Hold your hand here and turn to Ezekiel 30. Ezekiel 30. We're going to find a definition of this in another place. Starting verse 21. Ezekiel 30, 21, 22. Son of man, I have broken the arm of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and behold, it has not been bound up for healing or wrapped with a bandage, that it may not be strong to hold the sword. So here's the relationship between the arm and the sword. Okay, the strength of the arm is broken, not able to use the sword. Verse 22. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and will break his arms, both the strong and the broken, and I will make the sword fall from his hand. So here we have this image of the damaged arm which holds the sword. His power's broken. Well, apparently, the application here is that, again, at this event where he's mortally wounded, his power's broken. His ability, his power, his strength, the sword are broken. All right? And also, not only is his arm, about the arm, but his right eye. That is, and I think it's an allusion to his head, his vision of his head, okay? His right eye, and it may be that we find that his mortal head wound will include his eye. That's where he gets wounded in the head. It is in the eye. That's a possibility, very much. And then it says his arm will be totally withered, so there'll be no power for a while, and his right eye will be blind until he's healed. Okay? So again, I find these prophecies here to be remarkable in their detail. Not only in their scope, that he's prophesying things that are at a minimum 500 years in the future, but actually, in the scope of the Antichrist, 2,500 years probably in the future. Yeah.
So this last verse says about the event when the Antichrist or Pseudo-Christ will be wounded and therefore temporarily lose his power.
Yes.
Until he will be miraculously healed. Okay.
Gain superhuman power as a result. Orchestrated, as we know by Daniel said, by the devil. Okay, and also in Revelation 13 it says that it's by the power of Satan that this occurs. So, like I said, he'll first seem to be the savior of the flock, but then he'll be the ultimate persecutor. Isn't it interesting that we believe, because of Daniel also 9, that he makes an agreement with Israel, the many, for half a week, 3.5 years, but then it's broken. So, exactly. So he appears to be supportive of the Jews for the first half, but then he's their worst enemy the second half. He's their worst persecutor in the second half. So, now I made the point here. We call him Antichrist, but I think it's really a bad word. Because really it'd be better to call him Pseudo-Christ. Because he's not really the opposite of Christ. He's not anti. Okay? He takes qualities of Christ, but they're changed and perverted.
It's a very bad copy.
Yeah, a very bad copy. Well, I prefer calling him Pseudo-Christ than Antichrist. But, of course, the name is stuck, and no one's going to change it because it's stuck. So, anyway.
Now, which place in Matthew Jesus said about Antichrist?
Matthew 24.
Well, 24,
He says many will come in his name.
yeah. I don't know that he specifically names Antichrist in Matthew
Or
24.
false shepherds, I guess.
I don't know that he says many, in the first 4, 5, 6 verses of Matthew 24, he says, beware of false Christs. Right?
24, 94.
Yeah. Beware of false Christs.
For false Christ and false prophets will arise.
Right.
So there will be many false Christs.
Yes, but there's going to be the one ultimate.
Yeah.
And it goes, interesting enough, what's his buddy called?
The false prophet.
The false prophet. The false prophet. And the false Christ. They're the end point in history of the worst of the worst.
So they're like the whole mafia or
Yes.
false.
Yeah,
Christ.
there's a triad, a triune of mafia in the end. It's the dragon,
Mm-hmm.
it's the Antichrist, and it's the false prophet,
The beast.
the beast.
Okay. Well, dear.
Questions, comments, ideas, alternate ideas?
It was very interesting.
I think it's Obama.
Yeah, he sent me this link today, or the other day. He sent this link that said, describing all these verses, the person says, it's Obama. And I'm going,
Obama couldn't
doesn't really describe
He's
this
not
very
dead yet.
He couldn't
You don't know. He hasn't
You don't know,
gone
that's right.
yet. Yeah, well, I think I'm going to put my bets on someone else there. So.
Must be a Trump guy. Well, another one was the Pope, so.
Yes, the Pope, right. It's the fall
I
back.
don't know that we'll be here to recognize.
I hope.
Oh, I hope.
I hope. So,
Well, I think that he'll be coming out of the European Empire, won't they? I mean, isn't that?
it would appear so because it's the revived Roman. It's the Roman version too. Okay,
So Mr. Babylon is Denver.
Good. I'm sorry.
Oh, I could.
I said unless Mystery Babylon is Denver.
It's Denver.
Denver, yeah.
Denver, Colorado.
Located in Denver.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Oh, you don't read enough garbage on the internet.
Yeah, I don't read the garbage. I try to stay away from the garbage and find the truth. So, all right, Michael, do you want to pray for us?
I will. Heavenly Father, it's been a great week. We have stumbled ahead, and now with more vision, we'll be able to do a better job on staying on that narrow road, Lord. And thank you for this opportunity, Lord. Thank you for Tim and all the time that this man of yours has put to enlighten this group as to what your book has to say, Lord. And we're excited that not only do we have Tim to guide us, but we also have you, Lord. And with you and your Holy Spirit, it will give us enlightenment and knowledge as to how to pursue this book. I am excited, Lord. So we just want to praise your holy name, and all of heaven is rejoicing for you, Lord. And I'm just delighted. I hope seriously that I'll be with that group soon, Lord. And I praise your holy name. Amen.
By the way, read chapter 12 and think in terms of what's going on geopolitically in the world today as you read it. 12 is going to be the quote, prophecy in the news. That's going to be chapter 12.